In this lecture, we shall continue with a discussion on bilateral and unilateral contracts. In this lecture, we shall seek to explain and distinguish between what amounts to a bilateral contract and what amounts to a unilateral contract. Now, this distinction is very crucial because in contract law, you can have a contract that is going to be either a bilateral contract or a contract that is going to be a unilateral contract. So it is important to know the difference between the two, bilateral contract and a unilateral contract. Now, for bilateral contracts, I'll give an example and then I'll use the example to explain what a bilateral contract is. Because for bilateral contracts, you have one person making a promise to the other that I'm going to sell my car that costs $100,000 to you. And then the other person too is saying that I also promise to pay you $100,000 for your vehicle. Now, what you can see in this case is that the person making the offer only promises to sell his vehicle to a particular person. The person making the acceptance is also promising to pay a particular amount of money. So, for example, a person who is living in Singapore tells somebody who is living in Australia that I promise that on the 1st of January, I will send to you 20 cartons of milk. Then the person in Australia says, I promise that when you bring the 20 cartons of milk, I will pay you $500,000. Now, in this case, no money has been paid to any person. All we have is that there is an exchange of promises. So you have one person promising the other person something, and the other person also making a return promise. That is how bilateral contracts arise. So you can see from our discussion that we mentioned that these are contracts that arise when one person who is known as the promisor, he makes a promise in exchange for a return promise from another person called the offeree. These contracts arise when one person known as the promisor makes a promise in exchange for a return promise from the other person called the offeree. So all we have is that there are two promises that are actually depending on each other. For example, A promises to sell and deliver 10 cars to B on the 10th of January 2020. B also promises to pay for all the cars when they are delivered. Over here, you can tell that there is an exchange of promises between two persons, thereby creating a bilateral contract. A bilateral contract. Then we have unilateral contracts. Now, for unilateral contracts, we do not have the exchange of promises. In fact, it is only one person. That is why it is called unilateral. It is only one person who is making the offer. And the person to whom the offer is made, usually all that the other person is required to do is the performance of the act. For unilateral contracts, you have one person making the offer, but the person to whom the offer is made is not required to make a return promise. All the person is required to do is action, performance. Go ahead and perform. That is all. action. I make the promise. I don't expect a return promise for you. All I return is action, meaning that there is a unilateral contract. So, for example, whoever shall help me arrest the murderer of this journalist, I shall pay you 5,000 Ghana cedis. Whoever shall help me arrest the murderers of Ahmed Swale, journalist, I will pay you an amount of 5,000 Ghana cedis. Now think about this. If I make this promise on radio to the whole world in Ghana, that whoever shall help me arrest the person, I shall pay 5,000 Ghana cedis. When the people are going to arrest, do they have to call me to inform me? No. Remember when we look at Khalil and Carbolic Smokeball, we were told that when people make general offers, remember Khalil and Carbolic Smokeball, where the Carbolic Smokeball company said that whoever shall buy this medical preparation shall use it according to the instructions and contract the influencer, will pay you £100. That was a unilateral contract because the promise was only coming from the promisor. The promise was only coming from the Carbolic Smokeball company. And all the other party was required to do was to tender the acceptance by the performance, by performing the action. So the action of looking for the murderer of Ahmed Swale, the action of buying the medical preparation and using it for the experiment is the acceptance of the offer. So for unilateral contracts, the promise emanates from only one person, known as the promisor, and he makes the promise in exchange for the actual performance by the promisee. And remember, it is a unilateral contract because the promisor does not require a return promise from the promisee. All the promisor requires is the performance of the act. All the promisor requires is the action of the acceptance. He requires the performance of the act. If I say, whoever shall paint my wall for me, I'll pay you 10,000 cedis. I don't want you to come and tell me I'm going to paint the wall. No, whoever shall paint the wall for me. So all I want is action. Go ahead and paint the wall and come and show yourself to me, and I pay you the money. And so it's a unilateral contract because the promise is made by only one person, i.e. the offeror. Now, how are unilateral contracts created? They are usually created by general offers made to the public at large or to a particular person by way of public notice. You remember once again the case of Carlill and Carbolic Smokeball. The offer was whoever will buy this medical preparation, use it and contract the influencer, will pay this amount of money. Now, that was an offer that was made to the public at large, a general offer. So, a general offer are usually offers that are made to the public at large or to a particular person by way of a public notice. And there are two types of general offers. You can have a general offer that can only be accepted by one person who is usually the first in time. And that's usually in the case of reward contracts. That whoever shall help you arrest the murderer of Ahmed Swale, we shall pay you 10,000 Ghana cedis. So it's only one person who will go and arrest him. Because once the first person arrests him, there's no other Ahmed Swale, there's no other murderer anywhere for any other person to arrest. So you can have general offers that can only be accepted by one person who is usually the first in time. So the first person who comes that accepts is the one that will be deemed to be the one that has accepted the offer. If I say, whoever shall paint my house for me, I shall pay 10,000 Ghana cedis. The moment Kofi comes for you to paint the house, which house again is there for you to go and paint? That is why we are saying that the first type of general offers are the ones that can only be accepted by one person, who is usually the first in time. And then there's another type of general offers. That one, they can be accepted by numerous persons. just like we saw in the case of Khalil and Carbolic Smokeball Company. Remember, in that case, we were told by the judge that whoever, Lily Elder said that whoever shall buy the medical preparation, use it according to the instructions and contract the influencer, that is the person that we will say has accepted it. So in the case of Carlill and Carbonic Smokeball, it was a general offer that could have been accepted by numerous persons. But that is different from the example where you say that whoever shall arrest the murderer of Ahmed Swale, you shall pay him 10,000 Ghana cedis. That one, only one person, or maybe, yes, can go and arrest the person, and then first in time, that arrest him, and then that's the end. There's no more murderer to be arrested anymore. And so, to explain unilateral contract and general office, I shall go through once again the case of Carlill and Carbolic Smokeball Company Limited. Reported in 1893, 1 Queen's Bench at page 256. What are the facts of this case? The defendants made a solid medical preparation, made and sold a medical preparation called the Carbolic Smokeball. And then the defendants advertised this smokeball in a number of newspapers in the following words. And I quote, £100 reward will be paid by the Carbolic Smokeball Company to any person who contracts the increasing epidemic influenza, colds, or any disease caused by taking cold after having used the ball 3 times daily for 2 weeks, according to the printed directions supplied with each ball. £1,000 is deposited with the Alliance Bank, Regent Street, showing our interest in the matter. Relying on the advertisement, plaintiff purchased one of the smoke balls at a chemist, used it in compliance with advertisements, contracted influenza, and then he sued the defendant for the £100, but the defendants refused to pay. One question for the court to decide was whether the advertisement was an offer or an invitation to treat. Now, in the holding of the court, this was what Lindley LJ said. And the statement I'm about to read here from the judge, which is explaining the unilateral contract, which is explaining the general offer, you will see that in this case of Carlill and Carbonic Smokeball Company, the general offer was one that could have been accepted by anybody at all who performs the conditions in a manner. So this is what the learned justice said. Lindley LG in the case of Carlill versus Carbolic Smokeball Company Limited, reported in 1893, 1 Queen's Bench at page 256. These are the words of the judge, and I quote. Now, that point is common to the words of this advertisement and to the words of all other advertisements offering rewards. They are offers to anybody who performs the conditions named in the advertisements. And anybody who does perform the conditions accepts the offer. In point of law, this advertisement is an offer to pay £100 to anybody who will perform the conditions, and the performance of the conditions is the acceptance of the offer. There was no need for the referrer in this case to give notice of the acceptance. That's another point you should note. Because Lindy LJ said that supposing that the performance of the conditions is an acceptance of the offer, he goes ahead to say that unquestionably, as a general proposition, when an offer is made, it is necessary in order to make a binding contract, not only should it be accepted, but that the acceptance should be notified. But is that so of cases of this kind? I think the true view in a case of this kind is that the person who makes the offer shows by his language and from the nature of the transaction that he does not require notice of the acceptance apart from notice of the performance. Now, if you take a look at this case of Khalil and Carbolic Smokeball Company, it is a case that clearly draws the distinction between bilateral and unilateral contracts. Now, if I ask you in Khalil and Carbolic Smokeball Company Limited, how many people made the offer? It was only one person, the company, Carbolic Smokeball Company. They were the only ones who made the offer. And that offer could be accepted by anybody who tendered the performance. So that is how we call a unilateral contract. And it was created by a general offer. The general offer was made to the whole world. You remember when we look at the types of general offers, we said there was one kind that can only be accepted by one person, who is usually the first in time, and the other that can be accepted by numerous persons, as the case may be. Now, let's look at the Khalil and Carbolic Smokeball. It falls under the second category, general offers that can be accepted by numerous persons. Because Lindley LJ said as follows, and as you can see, he said, and I quote, "They are offers to anybody who performs the conditions named in the advertisement. And anybody who performs the condition accepts the offer. In point of law, this advertisement is an offer to pay £100 to anybody who will perform these conditions, and the performance of the conditions is the acceptance of the offer." End of quote. So in Carlill and Carbolic Smokeball, we see a general offer that was made to the whole world and that was capable of being accepted by anybody who tendered the performance. That is Carlill and Carbolic Smokeball Company Limited. And that shows as general offers. So remember, general offers, you can have a general offer that can either be accepted by numerous persons, as we've seen in Carlill and Carbolic Smokeball, or by one person who is usually the first in time. Remember that for general offers, they are offers made to the public at large or to a particular person by way of a public notice. And remember, for unilateral contracts, the promise is made by only one person, and the person to whom it is made is usually required to only tender acceptance by way of performance. Remember the distinction between unilateral contracts and then bilateral contracts. Bilateral contracts where we have the exchange of promises. One person makes a promise to another who tenders his also a return promise. And a return promise is what would usually be the consideration for the other promise. And so there's a promise by one person, I promise to give you my car. Promise by another person, I promise to pay you 10,000 cedis for it. Bilateral contracts. So we've seen in this lecture what bilateral contracts are. We've also seen what unilateral contracts are. We have used a case of Khalil and Carbolic Smokeball to explain how you can have a unilateral contract created by a general offer. And then remember in Khalil and Carbolic Smokeball, we're told that the person tendering the acceptance does not even have to notify the offeror. All he's required to do is to perform the act, and that will be deemed to be an acceptance. Now that we are done with bilateral and unilateral contracts, our next lecture will be a discussion on what amounts to an acceptance in law. In contract law, when we talk about acceptance, what will amount to an acceptance? That is what shall be the subject of our next lecture. And so this is where we shall wrap up with our lecture on contract law, specifically bilateral and unilateral contracts. Thank you.